Have you ever held a baby in your arms, and 3 years later, seen that same face, the same size, with the same eyes, looking at you from the nursery, as if time had never touched him? I have, and there hasn't been a single night since then when I could sleep without hearing that soft breathing, trapped in another time, because that baby disappeared from the hospital, and 3 years later, he reappeared, in the same place, exactly as he was, as if he had never left. There was something strange about that shift from the beginning, even if I only realized it later. It was an August night, heavy, humid, as if the air was trying to suffocate the silence. The hallways were empty, more than usual. The lights in the neonatal ward flickered as if someone were testing time's patience, and for some reason, I felt a restlessness in my chest, a sense that something very wrong was about to happen. The hospital where I work is not like the others, at least not completely. It was built over the ruins of an older building, and they say there are still forgotten hallways, sealed passages from renovations that were never completed. The older staff whisper about doors that should never be opened, and rooms where clocks always stop at the same minute. I used to laugh at that, until that night. I was on duty alone in that ward, a rare thing, because there's always at least one technician with me, but she had been called to cover an emergency on the 3rd floor, that left me with all the newborns on my own, which was never a problem, until, at 3:17 a.m., something happened. The nursery camera went out for exactly 11 seconds. I was looking at the screen at that moment, and saw with my own eyes the system blink, freeze, and return. But when it came back, one of the cribs was empty. No alarm, no door had opened, no noise, no suspicious movement. The baby simply wasn't there anymore. I ran. I entered the nursery with my heart in my throat. I checked each crib, one by one, and realized that little Gabriel had disappeared. He had been born premature, only a few days old, and still needed constant care. He couldn't have left by himself. There was no way anyone could have entered without being seen. There was nothing, just silence and an empty crib. The administration's first reaction was to blame the system. They said it could have been a camera glitch, a counting error, a bed switch. But I was there. I had seen it. I had given that baby his bottle 2 hours earlier, and now he was gone, as if he had never existed. The police were called, investigations were opened, but everything led to nothing. The footage was corrupted. The medical records were mysteriously deleted from the system. The mother, who had been sedated after a complicated C-section, was kept under intensive observation for longer than necessary, some say to prevent her from telling what she saw. That night, the hospital closed the case as an administrative error. The mother, in shock, was transferred to another facility, and Gabriel's name disappeared from the files, the notes, everything, as if he had never existed. But I remember, and I can't forget, for 3 years I worked in that ward as if carrying a ghost in my arms. Sometimes, at night, I would hear a muffled cry coming from the end of the hallway, but there was never any baby crying. There was never anyone there. I started writing everything down, every detail, every noise, every power outage, and that's how I realized, whenever the clock struck 3:17 a.m., something happened. Lights flickered, doors locked, the system restarted. It was always the same time. Colleagues started reporting, strange events too, carts moving on their own, vital signs changing suddenly on screens, babies crying in unison, even while in separate rooms. There was something happening in that nursery, something no one wanted to see. I never told anyone, not even my husband. It was as if the hospital held a secret that punished anyone who dared to question it. But everything changed on the night of August 12th, 3 years after Gabriel's disappearance. Was on duty again, as always. The clock showed 3:14 when the lights began to flicker. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and immediately looked at the nursery camera. It froze. For 11 seconds, exactly, and when it came back, the crib that had been empty 3 years earlier was now occupied. I ran there without thinking, and when I entered, the sound of the heart monitor was the first thing that hit me. That rhythmic, steady sound, just like the ones I used to hear in the nights when Gabriel was still with us. And then, I saw Dot in the same crib, with the same light blue blanket, with the same wristband, the same baby, the same face, the same eyes, without any signs of aging, without any evidence that 3 years had passed. It was as if he had been returned to the exact place he was taken from, frozen in time. My body froze. I couldn't touch him. I could only stare, because everything in me said that it was impossible, that it wasn't natural, that that baby wasn't the same. Or maybe he was, but from where? I called security. I called the supervisor. And, as always, the response came cold, silent, indifferent. I was placed on leave for exhaustion the same day. And when I tried to return to the hospital 2 weeks later, my badge no longer worked. I tried to find the mother, but she had also disappeared. They said she had moved to another state, changed her name, but no record of her exists anymore in the hospital's system. Nothing, not of her, not of Gabriel, not of me. During that shift, what I found in the old files shouldn't have been there. A duplicated medical chart, a crossed-out name, an old photo, and a date, August 12th. Repeated in every disappearance recorded since the hospital's foundation. Yes, Gabriel was not the first, and I fear he won't be the last. For days, I couldn't talk to anyone. There was something in my throat, as if any word I spoke could be heard by someone who shouldn't be listening. It was as if that baby was still inside the hospital, even though I could no longer enter. I started dreaming of that moment. Always the same scene. I opened the nursery door, and there he is, standing in the crib, eyes wide open, staring at me without blinking, as if he were waiting, as if he knew who I was. In the first week of my leave, I began to notice strange things at home. The phone would ring at 3:17 a.m., and no one would answer. The doorbell would ring, and there would be no one on the other side. My medical documents disappeared from the cabinet where I kept them. Even my digital clock froze for exactly 11 seconds that same night. I felt like I had brought something with me, as if part of the hospital had decided to follow me. I looked for former colleagues, but no one wanted to talk. Many refused to meet with me. A technician who worked with me on the night Gabriel disappeared only whispered on the phone, "You saw it. I know you saw it, but stop. They don't like it when we insist." Before I could ask who they were, she hung up and never answered again. A few days later, she requested a transfer to another state. Trying to understand what was happening, I started studying the hospital's history on my own. I combed through public records, old newspapers, even forgotten medical journals in abandoned libraries. I discovered that the original building had been a children's asylum in the 1940s, shut down due to allegations of abuse and the disappearance of children who had been institutionalized for long periods. The story had been silenced, but some local newspapers from the time spoke of babies who vanished during the night without a trace. There was one particular article that paralyzed me, dated August 1952. The headline read, "6-month-old boy disappears from psychiatric children's ward, reappears 3 years later with no signs of aging." In the black and white photo, a crib that looked like the ones in our neonatal unit, the same kind of wristband, the same vacant stare. Time seemed to be playing inside that hospital, or maybe something far worse was playing with time. The more I discovered, the more I realized there was a pattern to the cases. Always in August. Always around 3:17 a.m., always with a failure in the records. Names that vanished, cameras that froze, and a common feeling recorded in the charts of nurses placed on leave for emotional instability, that the babies weren't just disappearing, but being taken to a place where time didn't pass. I returned to the hospital posing as a visitor, pretending to be interested in transferring my elderly mother to the palliative care unit. I used that as an excuse to walk through the corridors. I pretended to get lost to reach the neonatal ward. The place looked different. The walls had been painted. The cribs were new. But the clock at the reception was still there. And it still read 3:17, frozen, as if stuck since the last dawn. I approached the counter pretending to look for a staff member. The receptionist was young, but her eyes showed that she knew. When I casually asked about the nurseries, she just looked at me and said quietly, "Don't go to the end of the corridor. Not at night." Then she got up and left without giving any explanation. That gave me chills, but it confirmed that I wasn't alone. That same night, I decided to do something risky. I used my old badge, which, surprisingly, worked again, and entered through the back door of the hospital, where some of the old staff still knew my name. I went straight to the technical wing where the security camera servers were located. The same room where, years ago, I used to watch the monitors, with my eyes fixed on the incubators. But something was different. The room was empty, and all the cables had been unplugged, as if someone had removed any possibility of recording. At the back of the room, I found a small locked box. There was no identification. It was covered in dust, but had recently been disturbed. I used an emergency key I had kept since my early years on shift. Inside the box were tapes, many of them, all with different dates, and almost all marked the same time frame, between August 10th and 14th. Different years, but always the same period. As if there was an invisible window, where the impossible repeated itself. I took one of the tapes with me. I went to an old friend who still had a playback device. When we played the tape, what we saw took our breath away. A recording of the nursery, seemingly normal, showed a nurse feeding a newborn. But at 3:17 a.m., the video simply cut out. And when it resumed, the nurse was alone, staring at the empty crib, as if she had blacked out for a moment. But the most terrifying part, was the nurse's face. It was mine. I stopped the video immediately. I combed through the footage looking for explanations, but the images were too clear for it to be a date error. That tape was from 2 years before Gab's birth, and yet, it showed me, in the current uniform, in the nursery, as if I had already been there before I ever started that shift. Time inside that hospital didn't follow logical rules. It bent, it repeated, or maybe it was being rewritten. It was in that moment I began to doubt my own memory. Did I really meet Gabriel for the first time that night? Or had that baby already appeared before? And what if the one who disappeared wasn't him, but me? I went home in shock. I didn't sleep. During the night, I searched through old photos of hospital staff. I found an old album, dated 1986, in the middle of the neonatal ward team. There was a woman wearing the same badge as mine, the same glasses, the same haircut, and the same name, mine. On the back of the photo, someone had written in red ink, "She always comes back in August." It was as if everything was leading me to a single point, a cycle, something that had been repeating for decades, involving the same faces, the same names, the same disappearances, and now, it was closing again. The following night, I received a letter under my door, an envelope with no sender. Inside, just a single sheet of paper, with a single sentence written in shaky handwriting, "He's still waiting in the crib." I couldn't resist the impulse. I returned to the hospital. I entered through the emergency entrance, went down the service stairs, and went straight to the nursery. It was 3:15 a.m. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered, and the sound of my footsteps echoed as if time itself was listening to me. Approach. When I reached the glass door, I saw the crib at the back of the room, and there, covered by the same blue blanket, was Gabriel, or someone who looked like Gabriel. But something was different. He didn't move, he didn't breathe, and still, he was looking at me. I couldn't go in. I stood there, motionless, on the other side of the glass, because at that moment, I realized that whatever was inside that crib wasn't a baby waiting to be saved. It was something waiting for me to close the cycle. And then, the wall clock began to move again. It read 3:17. The door behind me locked by itself. The lights went out, and in the absolute darkness, I heard that soft breathing, the same one that has haunted me since the first night, as if time was about to begin again. I don't know how long I stayed there, trapped between the locked door and the cold glass of the nursery. The emergency light turned on moments later, flickering, bathing the hallway in a faint red, as if each pulse were warning me, "You've gone too far." That feeling in my chest, the same one I felt every August dawn, had become something heavier. I was no longer just being watched. I had crossed a line, and I knew the hospital knew. My first reaction was instinctive. I tried to force the door back open. I pushed, banged, screamed. No one answered. But, for some reason, I didn't panic. It was as if my body already expected it. As if, somewhere in my mind, I knew this was inevitable. That from the moment I saw Gabriel again, I was no longer outside the story. I was part of it. His image in the crib didn't fade. He was there, motionless, eyes locked on mine, but without making a sound. No crying, no movement, and yet, there was something in his gaze that said, "You know what to do." But I didn't, and at the same time, I did. Because it felt like an old memory was trying to resurface, something I had buried just to survive. Minutes later, the door unlocked on its own. A dry, almost organic click. As if the living structure of the hospital had decided to let me in. I entered the nursery without thinking. I approached the crib, hesitant. The air inside was heavy, stuffy, but senseless, as if the oxygen was eternally recycled. And when I reached out to touch him, everything stopped. The sound, the light, time, everything. I found myself surrounded by silence. But not an ordinary silence. It was the absence of any reference. I couldn't hear my heartbeat. I couldn't hear my breath. I heard nothing but a distant pulsing, as if it came from the walls. I touched the blanket. It was cold, very cold, and suddenly, the baby blinked, once, slowly, as if he were waking up. And at that exact moment, an image passed through my mind, not mine, but his, a dark place, an old corridor, and dozens of cribs, occupied. Backing out was no longer an option, this had become a calling, a cycle that demanded I go to the end. I picked Gabriel up in my arms. He was lighter than he should have been, fragile, as if he had just been born again. But he didn't cry, he just looked at me. And for some reason, when I held him, a sharp pain shot through my head. An image came back again. Me, many years ago, carrying another baby, with the same face. I tried to leave the nursery, but the door was gone. In the place where it should have been, there was a wall, as if the space had reshaped itself around me. I turned in every direction. Nothing made sense. The windows had vanished. The furniture had changed, and the sound had returned. But it was a soft melody, like an old music box, coming from nowhere, filling everything. Gabriel moved his head slightly in my arms. His fixed eyes began to follow something invisible on the ceiling. I looked up too, and, for a second, I saw something that froze me to the bone. A face, a woman, very similar to me, watching from above, but with an empty look, like that of an old doll. And then she disappeared. The floor beneath my feet trembled lightly, as if we were in motion, but nothing else moved. The cribs were now empty, all of them, except the one I held, and the door that no longer existed, began to form again, as if being redrawn by an invisible force. Hesitantly, I walked toward it. I touched the doorknob. It was warm, as if it were alive. On the other side, the hospital looked different. The walls were old, yellowed tiles. The floor was worn wood. It was the same building, but in another era. There were no fluorescent lights, just small filament bulbs that flickered like candles hanging from the ceiling. And there was no one, only the distant sound of children singing. I walked slowly down the corridor. Gabriel, in my arms, remained still, but his eyes seemed to absorb everything. With each step I took, I felt pressure in the air, as if I were passing through layers of time that refused to touch one another. And then, turning a corner, I saw something impossible. Myself, younger, wearing an old uniform, pushing a crib, with Gabriel inside. I nearly screamed. But the other version of me didn't see me. She seemed trapped in a loop, making the same path, going to the end of the hallway, entering a door, returning with an empty crib, repeating, always repeating, a closed cycle. I approached slowly, barely breathing, and that's when I realized, this wasn't just a vision, it was a memory. My memory, something I had lived, but forgotten. The door the other me was heading toward was ajar. When I approached, I saw inside dozens of stacked files, all labeled, incomplete cycle. I opened one of the envelopes, and there it was, a photo of me, holding Gabriel, dated August, but a year before his birth. The form read, received, not delivered, and below, in red letters, were instructions: do not interrupt, do not investigate, do not witness. It was as if there was a secret protocol, an internal policy regulating out-of-time disappearances, and I was breaking every one of those rules. I ran back into the hallway, but everything had changed. Now the walls were covered with photographs of babies, hundreds of them, with dates that made no sense. Some born in 1930, others in 2089, all with the same expression, fixed eyes, half-open mouths, as if trapped in an eternal instant. At the end of the corridor, a figure appeared, a woman in a lab coat, her face covered by an old gauze mask. She said nothing. She only pointed to a door with a symbol I had never seen before, a circle, cut in half, with a red dot in the center. Gabriel began to stir in my arms, as if he recognized it, and without realizing, my legs carried me to the door. When I entered, time seemed to completely unravel. We were in a room without walls. The floor was liquid, but it didn't wet. The sky was dark, without stars, and around me stood all the other missing babies, standing, with adult eyes, watching me. and in the center, there was an empty crib, waiting for me. In that moment, I understood it wasn't just Gabriel who had returned. I had been returned too, as if the hospital had taken me years ago and only now let me go. But something had gone wrong. I remembered. I investigated. I broke the cycle. The masked woman approached. She whispered something in my ear I couldn't understand, but that echoed in my mind like an ancient command. Begin again. And in the blink of an eye, everything disappeared. I was back in the nursery, in the present, holding Gabriel, and the alarms were sounding, as if I had never left, but I knew I had crossed over, and now, something inside me had changed. The clock read 3:18, and it was the first time I had ever seen it go past that hour. I stood there, staring at the clock showing 3:18, as if that extra minute were a miracle or a sentence. For 3 years, everything revolved around 3:17. It was the time when the disappearances occurred, when the cameras failed, when whispers seemed to take shape in the empty corridors. But now, time had moved, something had changed, and deep down, I knew it wasn't a relief. It was a warning. In the following days, I tried to stick to a routine. I went home, closed the windows, turned off the phone. I wrote everything I remembered in notebooks, trying to organize what was real, what was a dream, and what no longer fit into any known logic. But something was wrong with me. I started to notice that people on the street looked at me longer than usual, that the lights in the house flickered whenever I entered a room, that the shower water, at times, flowed upward. On the second night, after my return, I received another letter under the door. This time, there were no words, just a photo of me, lying in a hospital bed, intubated, with tubes coming out of me, and the hospital's mark in the lower corner of the image. On the back of the photo, a date, August 12th, 3 years ago, the date of Gabriel's disappearance, the date when I was supposedly awake. On shift, I ran to find my medical exams, tried calling former doctors, requesting records, anything to prove I was conscious that day. But all the records had vanished, as if, during that period, I had never existed, for as if someone had kept me alive on the outside, while inside, I was asleep. I started reviewing the security cameras around the hospital. I paid a technician to help me access the parking lot footage, where my car was supposedly parked that night. The video was clear. It showed the hospital entrance at 3:16, a car identical to mine arriving. But the person who got out wasn't me. It was someone identical to me. The same features, the same posture. But there was one detail. She wore a badge that glowed red. The technician paused the image, looked at me, startled, and asked, "Do you have a twin sister?" I said no, and he simply whispered, "Then, someone is lying, or time is." That hit me like a punch. The frozen image of the woman identical to me, walking toward the hospital entrance at 3:17, with the baby in her arms, while I, at that exact moment, swore I was at home. I started dreaming about the corridors again, but now, the dreams came with noises, muffled voices calling my name, doors opening on their own, cribs moving as if pushed by invisible hands, and always, in the end, the same sound, a knock on the wall, 3 times, always behind me, as if someone were trying to get out. On the third night, I woke up on the living room floor, with dirt on, my hands and my feet filthy, as if I had walked through a dark place. Next to me, the same brown envelope, inside, another photo. Gabriel, now standing, older, 3 years older, standing in front of my old break room at the hospital, but the hospital behind him was in ruins. I ran to the city foundation, asked for records of the hospital's construction. I discovered that, officially, the hospital was shut down in 1974 after a fire in the nursery, but I worked there. People came and went. Doctors, patients, births. How was that possible? I contacted a local investigative journalist. I showed him the photos, told him what I had seen. He disappeared 2 days later. Now, the hospital no longer exists on the city map. The GPS doesn't recognize the address. When I type the name online, I get only error pages, but the building is still there. I went to it. The facade is worn, graffiti covered, with broken windows. But the back door, the one I entered so many times, still recognizes my badge. And it opens. The inside was just as I remembered. The walls, the corridors, even the reception clock. But everything covered in dust, cobwebs, abandonment. And yet, the clock still worked. It showed 3:16, And I knew, when it hit 3:17, something would come, because even in ruins, that place breathed, like an organism that sleeps, but never dies. I returned to the nursery. The walls still had the marks where the cribs once stood. At the back, the same glass door, and on the floor, a single infant wristband. I picked it up with trembling hands. It read Gabriel in my own handwriting. On the other side, the birth date. But it was no longer the same. It was dated for 2 weeks from now. I felt the floor vibrate slightly. The old light bulbs began turning on one by one, as if an invisible force were preparing the space for something. I hid behind a divider and waited, and then I saw her. The woman identical to me, again, holding Gabriel in her arms. She walked slowly, as if carrying out a mission she already knew by heart. She opened the crib, laid the baby down, and whispered something to him. I approached slowly. Every step I took echoed as if time were bending around me. When she turned, she saw me, and wasn't startled. She simply said, "Don't be late, the cycle needs a nurse." And then, she vanished. Gabriel remained in the crib, sleeping, with the newly placed wristband. It was as if everything was starting over, as if that were the first time, again. But why was I there? Why was I seeing everything as if from outside and inside at the same time? An intense light filled the room, not coming from lamps, but from the air itself, as if the room were being sucked into itself. The clock read 3:17, and this time, I didn't resist. I approached the crib. I touched Gabriel, and the instant my skin met his, I saw myself, lying down, on a hospital bed, with tubes, just like in the photo, monitors around me, a doctor whispering to a nurse, "She still hasn't woken up," but she responds to visits, and in the reflection of the window, me, but much older, watching myself, and then I understood, maybe I never woke up. Maybe that shift was only the echo of a consciousness that refuses to let go, a cycle of guilt, repetition, and care, where babies don't grow older, because they are frozen memories of something that never happened. Maybe Gabriel never existed, or maybe he was the last patient I lost before falling into a coma. Maybe my mind recreated the hospital to try to fix the mistake, repeating, until I forgave myself, but for some reason, the cycle refused to close. The clock by the hospital bed showed 3:18, and for the first time in 3 years, I heard my own heart beating from outside the room, as if something on the other side were calling me back. I opened my eyes slowly, as if my eyelids weighed tons. The white hospital ceiling stared back at me, but there was something different about the light. It was colder, more real, more present. For a moment, I believed I was waking up, that it had all been the delirium of a mind too wounded to deal with the past. But then I felt it. There were no tubes, no machines, and no sound of monitors. What surrounded me was silence. I stood up slowly. I was lying on a gurney in the center of an empty room. The windows were covered with thick curtains. The air was still dense. On one of the walls, a mirror, or what seemed like a mirror, because when I approached it, I didn't see my reflection. I saw another version of myself, one that seemed to be waiting for something, one that blinked slightly delayed, as if stuck in another frequency of time. On the opposite wall, a clock, no hands, no numbers, just the circular outline, motionless, like a scar. I walked to the door, locked, and on the floor, a folded piece of paper. I picked it up with trembling hands. On it, written in dark ink, "You are where you've always been." There was no sender, but the handwriting was mine. Sat in the corner of the room, hugging my knees, trying to remember the last concrete thing before the collapse. The crib, Gabriel, the woman with my face, the ruined hospital, the bed, everything was tangled, as if the memories had been shuffled to confuse me. But there was one common thread. Him, always him. That Gabriel appeared like a fixed point, the only face that didn't change, the only constant presence. It was as if he were the thread that kept this unraveled fabric still connected to some kind of reality. But who was he, really? A lost baby, a repressed memory, or just the manifestation of the mistake I never fixed? I got up and began banging on the door, first gently, then harder. No response, no reaction, only the echo, until I heard it. 3 knocks, from the other side, slow, firm, as if someone was listening to me, as if they had been there a long time, just waiting for me to do my part. I stepped back, my heart racing, and turned toward the mirror. But now, it showed something different. No longer the other version of me. It showed the nursery, the empty crib, and in the background, Gabriel, sitting on the floor, playing with something that looked like a stethoscope. He wasn't looking at me. He just repeated the same movement, picked up the object, placed it on the floor, and looked at the crib, as if he were waiting for me to arrive. I felt a weight in my chest, as if I were about to make a decision I couldn't take back. I went back to the paper on the floor. I turned it over. Now, there was another sentence. You can leave, but the cycle will continue. And below, a future date, exactly 3 years from now, August 12th, the room began to darken at the edges, not like a lighting effect, but as if reality itself were being erased. The floor vibrated lightly. The air grew thick. It was as if time were about to be rewritten once again, and I was just a piece moved by invisible hands. An old board. A game repeated for ages. The mirror shattered from the inside out. The shards didn't fly. They disappeared into the air, as if they had never existed. And in their place, an open door. The nursery again, but empty. Just one crib, and a blue blanket. I walked toward it. Each step of mine was like an echo of the first night, the one when I thought everything had started. The crib was cold, the blanket intact, and one detail made me shiver. The name on the wristband was now mine, and the birth date was for the following day. I touched the wood of the crib, and felt a wave of heat rush through me. It was as if I were being pulled into something older than time. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there she was, the nurse. Me, with the red badge, with empty eyes, no expression, just watching me. She said nothing, just extended her hand, and instinctively, I took it. At the touch, I saw everything, every disappearance, every return, every repetition, every woman like me, every baby like Gabriel, every attempt to interrupt the cycle being corrected in silence. I saw doctors who went insane, technicians who vanished, burned documents, wings sealed off. And I saw that the hospital's foundation was a false name. Behind the institution, a secret program, an experiment. I let go of her hand violently. I shouted that I didn't want to take part anymore, that I didn't accept it, that it made no sense. But the hospital doesn't listen to arguments. It only repeats. It only executes. It only exists. I ran. I passed through hallways that seemed to bend, through rooms that hadn't been there before. I saw faceless patients. I saw co-workers who had died years ago. I saw myself lying in several beds at different ages. And in all the versions, the eyes were open, watching, recording. At the end of it all, I found the exit. An old door, made of solid wood, marked with the same symbol, the split circle and the red dot. I touched it with a trembling hand, and finally, it opened. On the other side, the city, silent, static, no wind, no sound, like a poorly lit model. I returned home, but the key no longer turned. The neighbors didn't recognize me. My name wasn't in any registry. Not at the hospital. Not at City Hall. Not on the internet. It was as if I were just an old memory of someone who had once passed by and was never seen again. I rented a small room on the outskirts of the city. I began writing everything, day after day, trying to leave a record. So if someone saw it, no. But the notebook disappears every night, always, and reappears blank in the morning. Today is August 11th. Tomorrow will be the day, that day, and I know something is going to happen. Because all the sounds have already stopped, all the clocks are already frozen, and the crib is set up again, in the center of my room, with the blue blanket, with the wristband, and with the sound of breathing that has returned. I don't know if all of this is real, or if I was just another collapsed mind trying to make sense of what it lost. But the cycle is about to close. And I feel that, this time, something will come from the other side, something that has always been waiting. When I look in the mirror now, I no longer see just myself. I see all the others who came before, and I see all those who will come after. Nurses, witnesses, guardians, part of something greater. Something that no one outside the hospital would ever understand. And Gabriel, maybe he was never a baby, maybe he was never a victim, maybe he is the door. And what if he is? What if all these years, all these early mornings, all these repetitions, were only the opening mechanism, a temporal code, a medical ritual, a thin veil between realities, and I, the final key. If this ends here, let it be recorded. Let someone read it. Let someone know that the disappearances weren't accidents, that the hospital never stopped. It only continued from within. And if one day, while walking through an old hospital, you hear a cry coming from a sealed nursery, don't go in, because maybe it's not a cry, maybe it's a calling. Now tell me, do you really believe that everything that disappears was taken far away, or just returned to the wrong place, at the wrong time? Comment below if you've ever lived through something that time can't explain. Or if, at some moment, you too were called at 3:17.